Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into the progressive era today.
Yeah, it's more than just, busting those big trusts and monopolies.
Right, exactly. We always hear about those.
It's about, reshaping all of American life.
Really, from the ground up.
From the ground up.
So we've got this document basically outlining, all these key reforms.
A lot to cover.
And our mission today is to kind of understand, how these changes actually affected people's lives.
A real impact.
Not just the big headlines, right?
Right, yeah. It's fascinating when you consider that a lot of these changes, they actually started locally.
Locally?
Yeah, we often think of the big national figures,
Like Teddy Roosevelt and all that.
Exactly. But the roots of the progressive era were really planted in cities and towns all across America.
So cities leading the charge. That's kind of interesting. You wouldn't think of bustling urban centers as the birthplace of reform.
Well, think about the challenges that cities faced back then.
Okay.
Inadequate sanitation. You had these political machines controlling everything for their own gain. Corruption was just rampant.
Yeah, it was a mess.
People were desperate for solutions, and that's where this innovative idea of a city manager government came into play.
Okay, so instead of the old ward-based system with the party bosses calling all the shots.
Precisely. The city manager was like a professional, often someone with a background in engineering or administration.
So someone who knows how to run things?
Exactly. They were brought in to run the city like a well-oiled business. Efficiency and expertise were key.
So imagine your city council, actually operating like a smooth, efficient business. That was kind of the goal.
That was the idea, but it wasn't just about making things run better. Progressives also aimed to use city government to strengthen families.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and improve social welfare.
So they were looking beyond just fixing potholes and garbage collection.
Absolutely. There was this really deep concern about what they saw as moral decay, particularly in urban areas. And this led to some initiatives that might seem surprising today.
Okay, like what? Give us an example.
Well, take movie theaters, for instance.
Movie theaters, yeah.
They were this new form of entertainment. But some progressives saw them as potential threats to morality, especially for young people.
Really? Going to the movies was a risky activity back then.
You could say that. They were concerned about the content of the films, the dark theaters, the mingling of strangers, all seen as potential sources of corruption.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective.
And this fear led to, believe it or not, calls for censorship.
Censorship.
And regulating, when and where movies could be shown.
So it wasn't just about making cities run better. It was about, shaping society's morals and values, too.
Exactly. And this concern about moral decay, it extended beyond just movies.
Okay.
Dance halls, amusement parks, anything considered idle leisure came under scrutiny.
Idle leisure, wow.
Even family size became a target of reform.
Family size? That's unexpected. How did they try to reform how many kids people were having?
Well, there was a movement advocating for smaller families, driven by this idea that parents could, better allocate resources,
right.
Their time, their money, their attention, if they had fewer children.
It's a reminder that even movements with good intentions can have some complicated aspects, right?
It's true.
So these reform efforts, they touched so many aspects of life.
Definitely.
But it wasn't just happening at the local level, right? Progressives were also pushing for change at the state level.
Oh, yeah, big time.
What were some of their key initiatives there?
At the state level, the focus was really on empowering citizens and weakening that grip of those political machines.
Right, those party bosses.
Yeah. And this led to several innovations in how people actually participated in government.
Like what?
Well, you had the secret ballot, initiatives, referendums, and the power of recall, all designed to give more power to the people.
It's amazing how those reforms, enacted over a century ago are still shaping how we participate in democracy today.
Right. Still relevant.
Like the secret ballot, for example. That made it way harder for party bosses to manipulate elections.
For sure.
And initiatives and referendums gave citizens the ability to, directly propose and vote on laws, bypassing the legislature altogether.
Huge change.
And then there's the power of recall, which gave voters a way to remove corrupt or ineffective officials from office, before their terms were up.
Yeah, these were powerful tools. They really were. Designed to make government more transparent and accountable to the people.
But with any period in history, there's always a more complex side to the story.
Always.
You're talking about the issue of race and the Jim Crow South, right?
Yeah, I am. While progressives were pushing for social justice in a lot of areas, this era was also marked by the disenfranchisement and segregation of Black Americans.
It's a stark contrast that we can't ignore.
It is, and it makes you wonder, how could a movement so focused on progress also be so blind to the plight of millions?
That's a tough question, right?
Some historians argue that many progressives, particularly in the North, they just didn't prioritize racial justice, or they viewed it as like a separate issue.
That's a difficult truth to reconcile with all the positive changes that were happening during that time.
Oh, yeah.
But, despite these limitations, the progressive era also saw like a dramatic expansion of federal power.
Oh, absolutely.
What kind of things were they doing at the federal level?
Well, new laws were enacted to regulate everything, from like food safety to labor practices.
Wow, big change.
One of the most striking examples is the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Directly inspired by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
Wait, so you're saying like a book helped change how we regulate food?
That's exactly what happened.
That's incredible.
Sinclair's novel exposed the just absolutely horrifying conditions in Chicago's meatpacking plants. Unsanitary practices, adulterated food, the whole 9 yards.
The public was outraged.
They were, and Congress was forced to act.
I can imagine the shock that people felt when, those realities were brought to light.
Oh, yeah. It was a big scandal.
Paint a picture for our listeners. What were the conditions actually like in those meatpacking plants?
Well, imagine, meatpacking plants with basically zero regard for hygiene.
Oh, yeah.
Where diseased and rotten meat was just routinely mixed with fresh meat. Rats were running all over the place. Workers had no safety protections. It was a complete nightmare scenario.
Sounds awful.
It was. And Sinclair's book, it brought all of this to light in a way that news articles and government reports just couldn't.
Wow. So it was a vivid example of how literature could become this powerful tool for social change.
Absolutely.
So the reforms, though, they went beyond food safety, right?
Right, they did.
The progressive era also saw this surge in efforts to protect women and children.
Yes, definitely.
What kind of things were they doing for women and children?
Well, there was this growing concern about child labor, the exploitation of women workers, and just a lack of support for mothers and infants.
So how did they address these issues?
Well, this concern actually led to the creation of the Children's Bureau.
The Children's Bureau?
Yes, the very first federal agency solely dedicated to the welfare of children.
That's pretty amazing.
We also saw the passage of the Mann Act, which aimed to combat trafficking, but often ended up being used in discriminatory ways.
That's a reminder that even well-intentioned laws can have, unexpected consequences.
Absolutely. And then there's the Sheppard-Towner Act, which provided federal funding for maternal and infant health care.
So they were really trying to address those issues.
They were, and these were all landmark achievements, but they also highlight the complexities of social reform,
Absolutely. The Mann Act, for example, while it was aimed at addressing a real problem, it was often used to target interracial relationships and enforce traditional morality.
That's right. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned social reforms can have unintended consequences, and that the path towards justice, it's rarely straightforward.
That's such an important point.
Yeah, it is.
But beyond these, specific laws and agencies, the progressive era also saw a fundamental shift in how Americans perceived the role of government, right?
Oh, for sure.
And nowhere was this more evident than in the amendments to the Constitution that were passed during this time.
Yeah, we're talking about a whole series of amendments that fundamentally reshaped American governance.
Okay, like what?
Well, the 16th Amendment authorizing a federal income tax, the 17th Amendment providing for the direct election of senators.
So taking that power away from the state legislatures.
Exactly. Then you have the 18th Amendment prohibiting the manufacture and sale of alcohol, and of course the 19th Amendment finally granting women the right to vote.
Wow, it was a period of just remarkable constitutional change.
It really was.
And I think we need to, pause here and pick up the rest of this conversation in part 2.
I agree. There's so much more to unpack about the lasting impact of these reforms and what they mean for us today.
Absolutely. We'll be back soon to discuss all of that and more.
Can't wait.
See you then.
It really is remarkable how those amendments, ratified over a century ago, they still continue to shape American society today.
They do. They really do. I mean, take the 16th Amendment.
The income tax.
Some people, saw it as this essential tool for funding social programs and regulating the economy.
Right.
And then others viewed it as an infringement on individual liberty, a dangerous expansion of government power.
Exactly. Those debates, they're still very much alive today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And then the 17th Amendment, with its provision for the direct election of senators.
Yeah, that was a huge shift in power, away from those political machines and the state party bosses.
Yeah, it was a big win for people who believed in, greater citizen participation.
It was, but some argued that it also weakened the role of states in the federal system.
Okay.
And that it made the Senate more vulnerable to, like, popular whims.
So it's a reminder that even reforms that are aimed at, greater democracy
Right.
can have these complex implications.
They can.
It's all about navigating those trade-offs, I suppose.
Yeah, it is.
Now, speaking of complex outcomes,
Yes.
we can't forget the 18th Amendment and prohibition.
Oh, prohibition.
Talk about a social experiment with unintended consequences.
It really was.
So while the intention was to, curb alcohol consumption and, promote morality,
Right.
prohibition actually led to a surge in organized crime
Oh, yeah.
and just a whole culture of lawlessness.
It's a stark reminder that even those well-intentioned reforms can have these unforeseen and negative outcomes.
Yeah, it's a valuable lesson for sure.
It is.
But then there's the 19th Amendment, which is, a truly landmark achievement in the long fight for women's suffrage.
Absolutely.
It's hard to overstate the significance of this amendment, for decades.
Right.
Women had fought tirelessly for the right to vote, facing ridicule, imprisonment, even violence.
It's true.
The 19th Amendment really stands as a testament to their perseverance.
It does.
And it's a major step forward, in this ongoing struggle for gender equality.
It is, however, even with these hard-won victories, the progressive era was still a time of contradictions and complexities.
Right.
While there was substantial progress in areas like social welfare, labor rights, and political reform,
Right.
there were also some glaring blind spots.
Like the failure to adequately address racial injustice.
Precisely.
Hmm.
While some progressives championed the cause of civil rights, many others ignored, or even worse,
Right.
actively supported discriminatory policies that targeted Black Americans.
It's a sobering reminder
Yeah.
that progress is rarely linear or uniform.
It's true.
Even in periods of remarkable social change, certain groups can be left behind or actively marginalized.
They can. And it also raises some crucial questions about, how we define progress itself. Right.
Whose interests are truly served by these reform movements. These questions remain relevant today as we grapple with issues like economic inequality, racial justice, and environmental sustainability.
They do, for sure.
So where does that leave us? What can we learn from both the successes and failures of the progressive era as we face the challenges of our own time?
It's a big question, that's for sure.
It is.
What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this era?
Well, one key takeaway, in my view, is the undeniable importance of grassroots activism and citizen engagement.
Okay.
Many of the reforms we've been discussing today, they were sparked by ordinary people who saw problems in their communities and they took action to address them.
So you're saying that real change often starts at the local level?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
With individuals coming together to demand better.
Exactly. From city councils to state legislatures to the halls of Congress, progressives demonstrated that change is possible when people come together and demand it.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is, but we also need to be mindful of, the potential unintended consequences, right?
Absolutely.
Just like we saw with prohibition.
Right.
So it's not just about, pushing for change. It's about being thoughtful.
Yes.
And deliberate in our approach.
I agree.
Constantly assessing the impact of our actions and, being willing to adjust course when necessary.
That's right. And perhaps, most importantly,
Yeah.
the progressive era reminds us that that fight for justice and equality,
Right.
it's an ongoing process.
It is.
We've made significant progress in many areas, but systemic barriers and deep inequities still exist, and they demand our attention.
Yeah, that's a call to action for all of us to, continue the work that was started by the progressives to challenge injustice, to advocate for those who are marginalized, and to strive for, a more just and equitable society for all.
Well said.
Thanks. So as we've been discussing the progressive era,
Yeah.
I'm struck by how much it was a period of experimentation and innovation.
It really was.
They weren't afraid to, try new things, to challenge the status quo, to push the boundaries of what government could achieve.
You really weren't. I mean, think about the city manager system.
Right.
That was a radical departure from the old ward-based system.
It was. And then all those state-level reforms we talked about earlier,
Ah.
the secret ballot, initiatives, referendums, recall.
Yeah.
those were all about empowering citizens and making government, more responsive to their needs.
They were.
And even at the federal level, we saw this willingness to experiment with new approaches to, regulation and social welfare.
Absolutely.
The Pure Food and Drug Act, the Children's Bureau, the Sheppard-Towner Act.
Right.
Those were all groundbreaking initiatives.
They were. And let's not forget those constitutional amendments. Income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, women's suffrage.
Yeah.
They fundamentally reshaped the way America was governed.
That's for sure.
It really does kind of serve as a reminder that progress often requires boldness and a willingness to embrace new ideas.
That's a good point.
Of course, not every experiment is a success.
Right.
The progressive era had its fair share of failures and unintended consequences.
We've talked about a lot of those.
We have, but even those failures, they provide valuable lessons.
They do.
They teach us about the complexities of social change and the importance of learning from our mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really valuable lesson.
It is. And that brings us to, one of the most crucial lessons from the progressive era, the need for humility.
Humility, okay.
We need to recognize that there are no easy answers to these complex social problems.
That's a tough one.
It is.
The progressives, they really believed in progress.
They did.
But they also understood that it was like a journey, not a destination.
Right.
And that journey requires, constant vigilance, adaptation, and a willingness to change course when necessary.
Exactly. So as we face the challenges of our own time, let's remember that spirit of experimentation and innovation that characterized the progressive era.
Okay.
Let's be bold in our thinking and also humble in our approach.
Right.
Let's learn from the past, but not be bound by it.
It's all about finding that balance.
It is.
Being courageous enough to try new things while also remaining grounded in the lessons of history.
Exactly. And most importantly, let's never stop striving for a more just, equitable, and prosperous society for everyone.
Well said. This deep dive into the progressive era has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
I'm sure our listeners found it just as illuminating as we have. It's amazing how much we can learn from like a period like the progressive era, even though it happened, over a century ago.
I know, right?
It really makes you think about how we approach change today.
It does. It really does. And what really strikes me is that even though they were dealing with very different challenges back then.
Right.
Their core values.
Yeah.
Things like social justice, equality, democratic participation, they're still incredibly relevant to the issues we face today.
It's like their struggles are still kind of echoing, in our own time.
Right.
Whether it's fighting for economic fairness, addressing racial disparities, or making sure everyone has a voice in our political system.
That's true.
Those core values are at the heart of so many contemporary movements.
They are. That's such a good observation. It makes you realize that progress isn't just about achieving specific goals. It's about upholding those fundamental values and constantly striving to create a society that embodies them, more fully.
It's like a never-ending journey, isn't it?
It is.
Each generation builds on the progress of those who came before.
Right.
But there's always more work to be done.
Always, always. And the progressive era, it really reminds us that it's not just about passing laws or creating institutions. It's about shifting mindsets, challenging those deeply ingrained assumptions, and just constantly pushing.
We're more inclusive and just society. It's about tackling those huge systemic issues that can feel so overwhelming.
Like, how do we create a more equitable economic system? How do we dismantle systemic racism? How do we ensure that our democracy truly represents the voices of all citizens?
Those are the big questions, aren't they?
They really are.
And they require us to think critically, to be willing to challenge that status quo, and to come up with, innovative solutions, just like the progressives did.
Thinking back to all the reforms that we've discussed, it's inspiring to see how much change is possible when people come together and demand better.
Yeah, it really is.
Makes you realize that even small actions taken collectively can have a ripple effect and create lasting change.
They can.
And it also reminds us of the power of ideas.
It does.
At the heart of the progressive era were these powerful ideas about justice, equality, democracy, and the role of government.
Absolutely. And those ideas, they were debated, they were challenged, and they were refined, but ultimately they shaped the course of history.
It really does highlight how important it is
to engage with those huge ideas, to have those conversations, and to keep pushing for a better future, even when progress feels really slow or difficult.
Especially then.
Yeah, especially then.
Absolutely. It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
To stay informed, to get involved in our communities, and to never stop working towards, a more just and equitable world.
What a powerful way to sum it up.
Can try.
I think this deep dive into the progressive era has given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
And hopefully it'll inspire them to continue exploring, this fascinating period in American history.
I think it will. I really do.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the progressive era.
It was my pleasure. It was great to be here.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for progress.
Absolutely. See you next time.